To say I'm not a tennis fan would be an understatement. In fact, although I briefly as a schoolboy showed some skill with a tennis racket, I used to turn up at the courts dressed like Alf Tupper, the tough of the track, with fish and chips and paper by the side of the court. I was in all the colors of the rainbow. I didn't have white sand shoes. I didn't have white shorts, white top. I didn't have a white towel. So I was kind of persona non grata. And I never recovered from the shunning I got from the tennis establishment. In Britain, at least, it tends to be a very middle-class sport. But I, along with, I'm certain, the entire British people was jumping with joy at the victory of the rank outsider, Emma Raducanu, from Britain, a young girl, a teenager from Britain, who had to qualify for the US Open and became an overnight international, worldwide phenomenon. At least I hope that's how they see it in the United States. Let me ask Rachel Blevins if that is true. Rachel, apologies for coming over to New York and winning your Open Tennis Championship. How have the American people taken it?
I would say congratulations to you and your country on that one. You know, I think that unfortunately it's one of those things that really didn't get a lot of coverage, except more so in the sports world this week, because it has been really a crazy week over here in terms of coverage. And we've had a lot of everything related to the 9/11 anniversary that has dominated really our media coverage. And so unfortunately, while she did have an incredible feat, I don't think she got quite the day in the sun in the United States, although I'm sure she got a lot more coverage in the UK than she
for sure
did
here.
At
18 she's going to be with us for a long time, I hope. Let's go to 9/11. I saw some of the US coverage. I saw a lot of the British coverage until I had to switch it off, because of course only a person made of stone would not be moved by the recalling of these horrific events, this foul act of mass murder. Killed thousands of people and intended to kill thousands more. The more, the better, from the point of view of these murderers. It's impossible for me to look at George W. Bush and see him be rehabilitated in front of my eyes, hear people describe him as a unifying figure, all because he's not Donald Trump. It's very, very difficult to stomach, Rach.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that he was even allowed to speak yesterday at all, and the fact that anyone was paying attention to what he was saying, I think is a travesty in and of itself, because it shows that in 20 years, we have somehow forgotten all of the horrific crimes that his administration committed. I mean, 20 years, and yet the United States is still dealing with the actions today. We're still in Iraq. We're trying to get out of Afghanistan, it seems, in some ways. But, you know, when you look at the Bush administration's legacy, it is insane to think that anyone would stand up and listen to him and refer to him as any kind of unifier. And the speech that he gave was even more so troubling, because he was sitting there lecturing the public on not just paying attention to extremists abroad, but also paying attention to extremists here at home. And that's been a really troubling shift that, you know, a lot of people have been worried about, especially over the last year, especially looking at a lot of the political division, is that the United States is done looking at terrorists abroad and trying to stoke fear over what they may do. And instead, they're looking at the possibility of terrorists here at home. And, when we think about what Bush has done and we think about the reception of it, I mean, it is just crazy to see him along with the Obamas, the Bidens, the Clintons attending this 9/11 memorial and people talking about how great they were, how they were heroes, as if it wasn't these politicians, these war criminals that have led us into the very position that we're in today. And, of course, because it was the 20th anniversary, you had a number of documentaries that came out. And there was one that I was watching that specifically interviewed Bush, had interviewed Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, some of these top members of his administration. And it was bizarre to see that they were sitting there literally chuckling, saying, oh, yeah, on September 11th, on that morning, we had no idea what was going to happen. We didn't know, we were totally unprepared for this or for anything like it. I mean, it makes the United States look just laughable when you have an administration that acts like that. And 20 years later, that's suddenly their take on it.
Yeah, and being lionized, they should be in jail. George Bush and Tony Blair should be in prison. But instead, on primetime on the BBC, and it must have been true in the US, they're lecturing us all. As if, they committed none of the Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, extraordinary rendition, torturing prisoners, killing 1 million people in Iraq, spawning ISIS, and so on, as if none of that happened. Now it's cuddly George Bush.
Oh, yeah, everyone wants to talk about how he's the old grandfather who is now a painter, and that's kind of the light that they've put him in, not talking about the fact that there are thousands of family members who are fighting for some kind of truth, who are fighting for the United States government to be honest about what it knew, when it knew it. And on top of that, I mean, I know that there's been a lot of talk about the FBI's investigation into 9/11, whether those documents are ever going to be fully released. Biden kind of did a mini release where he, released 16 pages that were, of course, very heavily redacted. And you think about those thousands of family members who went through this horrible atrocity, and then they have to sit there and they have to watch these politicians who have lied to them, who have campaigned on the promise that they are going to fully release those documents, that they are going to make the truth known. And yet they get into office, they don't do it. Biden, did the bare minimum, really, of what he could do. And those family members have to sit there and they have to watch the media parading these politicians around. I mean, it's a slap in the face all over again 20 years later.
Yeah, exactly. It was Hamlet without the prince, wasn't it? New York City. He was like a ghost. He wasn't there, but he was there. In fact, it turned out he was being photographed with hundreds of firefighters. That was a cute move, in my opinion. I wouldn't want to have been in the shot with Clinton, Bush, and Obama. I'd rather have been in a shot with firefighters. It was quite a clever move. And if you saw him at the sports event and saw how the people reacted to him, he's definitely not finished, Rachel.
Oh, I would agree. And I think it was, sort of the perfect day for Donald Trump, if you want to call it that. He started out meeting with first responders. And these are really, I mean, you're talking about the blue collar workers. These are the people who helped get him into office in the first place. And so these are going to be the first people he goes to tell them how proud he is of them, how thankful he is for their service, to take photos, to, go through that whole rigmarole. And it's interesting that he did that, especially at a time where you have all the other past presidents that are over here at their memorial. And then you've got Trump over here doing his own thing, sort of making his own pathway. He doesn't want to be seen with the rest of them. It was a very smart, public relations move on his part. And then, of course, he hops on a private jet and goes down to Florida to be a commentator for a boxing match. Now, that was seen as an absolutely bizarre move. But of course, it's Donald Trump. He's going to make it work. And on top of that, I mean, he's got people in the crowd with signs that say, bring back 45 and Trump won. And these are his people. And so it's interesting that we're still waiting for that actual announcement that he's going to run again in 2024. But we got just enough of him to see that he's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Lastly, Rachel, although it's obviously a bigger story here than over there, I wondered if people were looking forward eagerly to Prince Andrew, or at least his lawyers, appearing in court tomorrow, or whether they, like our viewers and listeners, think there's not an earthly chance of Prince Andrew facing the music.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, it may be a while before we see Prince Andrew actually appearing in court here in New York City himself. And it's interesting to see that this is one of those stories where we've really watched, I mean, credit to Virginia Giuffre, who has worked tirelessly to fight for some sort of accountability for just a few of Jeffrey Epstein's contacts. I mean, we look at Jeffrey Epstein and the fact that the majority of the people who are in his inner circle have been able to walk free. We don't even talk about them anymore. We don't address them. We don't wonder where they've gone up to. And yet it's people like Ghislaine Maxwell, who, you know, they say is still behind bars, that's still working on her case. And when it comes to Prince Andrew, I mean, the fact that his lawyers responded and said, oh, well, they didn't serve the papers to us correctly. I mean, that was laughable, but also completely ridiculous. And it shows you that his team is not worried whatsoever about the possibility of him actually having to get into court, actually having to testify, and actually having to show whether or not he can sweat, because you know that that is going to be the first thing that happens if that day does come for Prince Andrew. But until then, I mean, it feels like the sort of the rallying cry to continue to call for accountability for Jeffrey Epstein's associates, it has gotten so minimalized, but I mean, it's still there in some cases.
Now, it's said that he can't sweat, or he said that he couldn't sweat, but it was revealed today in the newspapers that he's a big fan of Finnish saunas with a bit of birching afterwards. That would be a very odd recreation if you sat in a sauna but couldn't sweat, don't you think?
I would say so. I mean, I think he's kind of gotten himself into that hole on that one. I mean, who makes a comment like that? Who for that to be your defense? I mean, that's something else. I think I'm almost curious. I would love to see the man testify and curious to see what else comes out of his mouth. But at the end of the day, you know, you just hope that maybe one of these days, the women who were abused by Jeffrey Epstein and his associates, who were taken advantage of, who had their lives completely ruined by these people, that one of these days they will also get their day in court. Well
said. Thank you very much indeed, Rachel Blevins, our US correspondent.